And then Season 4 happened.
Hey guys, it's Pineapple, and I suppose with the season drawing to a close, it's probably the appropriate time to talk about this year's 25-episode offering of heroic action that does its best to tug at your heartstrings until they're tight enough to play like a guitar. Did this season of My Hero manage to use those strings in a way that set our hearts on fire, or did it all end up sounding just a bit out of tune? I paired up with Oceaniz to break down the season in two parts, since our opinions range from being pretty similar to being very different on the topic of how the anime has been handled this year. After we're done going over the first half of the review here, I'm gonna send you guys over to Ocean's channel to hear our thoughts on the Culture Festival and Pro Hero arcs and what our expectations are for next season. Now, season 4 held a lot of expectations with it, and the longer than usual wait time for the season definitely contributed to that. I think the big thing that made the wait so painful was knowing that we'd be coming back to the long-awaited internships or overhaul arc, where we'd finally get to see what many fans have been looking for more of in this series. We knew there would be high-intensity, high-stakes action between Deku, Mirio, and a whole new faction of villains, but apart from that, there were other great things to look forward to. We got to see a pro-hero operation being conducted from the ground up for the first time, as well as some focus on side characters like Kirishima and new characters like Sun Eater and Fat Gum. For some, I suppose the number one thing to look forward to was Deku's use of One for All 100% full cowling in episode 13, but the journey there was filled with its ups and downs. Now, I'm gonna go my best to not go off track and rant for an hour, but if I do go past the rails, I'm sure Ocean will grab me like the brave Harambe archetype he is and drag me back to sanity. So, let's get started.
Now, listen. I really don't like being the negative Nancy here. My name isn't even Nancy, it's Jebecca. And My Hero Academia is one of my favorite series of all time, but we are here to talk about Season 4, so let's talk about Season 4, specifically the first half, which covered the overhaul arc. Before we even talk about the contents, however, let's briefly mention the odd situation within which this season was produced. Essentially, there are two main factors that tend to contribute to an anime production's quality. This is also important, it's just a tendency, it's not a one-to-one causality. These factors are schedule and availability of talent. Schedule is simply how much time a production is given and how that time is divided between the various jobs. And Hiroaka has had a relatively good history with its scheduling, often having healthy time management. Season 4's later release date and longer gap after Season 3 meant that they had even more time to work on it, which usually would indicate a healthier production. As for talent availability, that's just which animators are available when and how. This was a bit of an unknown for Hiroaka Season 4, since, at the same time, Bones was also producing the new movie Heroes Rising, which raised concerns regarding who would be available for the actual season. Even the anime director, Kenji Nagasaki, left Season 4 to work on the movie, with Masahiro Mukai replacing him. We still don't exactly know how big the impact of the staff change was, but we can get an idea by looking at the quality of Season 4 in terms of adaptation, production, and consistency.
This season saw a shakeup in the production team behind the series because a large part of the crew went to work on the My Hero Academia Heroes Rising movie or other projects like Carol and Tuesday and more notably Fire Force. With a partially changed team over at Bones, the first episodes of the season had to show us how the show has either suffered or improved from being under Masahiro Mukai's new direction. Now, even from the trailers, we could tell things were a little different, but things still seemed fairly hopeful. Thankfully, I'd say that Mukai's addition to the series is a rather positive one, with My Hero Academia at first returning with an all-new added level of shine and gloss that wasn't quite present before. I definitely don't mean to say the show's prettier than it's ever been from a character perspective, and we'll get into why that isn't the case, but I can at least say that this season did see an improvement in the overall framing of shots, and the addition of dramatic bokeh-style lighting or artistic moving backgrounds to certain shots made parts of the adaptation feel more dynamic and inspired than it would be if the team was just translating everything from the page to the screen as is.
Honestly, the beginning was very promising. Starting with a recap episode is absolute doo-doo, but it was made bearable by our new director, Masahiro Mukai. You see, Kenji Nagasaki's direction of the first 3 seasons had been heavily criticized for being largely uninteresting and too safe, with most of the show's shots just being one-to-one recreations of the corresponding manga panels. This approach may be faithful, but it doesn't take advantage of the animated visual medium very much. After all, a manga and an anime achieve impact through different means, and Nagasaki's approach of basically just recreating the manga often ended up looking very basic and flat. This is where Mukai, who had previously directed episodes of Mob Psycho and Terror in Resonance, came in and really shook things up. Even the recap episode already looked way more visually interesting than it had any right to. with following episodes containing some incredibly stellar direction and scenes that took advantage of being an anime, while still preserving Horikoshi's vision. The first 7 or so episodes were truly some of the better looking and better paced Hiroaka we have had thus far. Even star animator Yutaka Nakamura, who you all know from the important fights like Deku vs Todoroki, made a quick appearance for a random scene of the girls fighting a no-name. Odd, but Cube Man goated.
This added polish is definitely appreciated, and I love the team's decision to constantly try to supplement the source material by adding anime-only scenes that further hint towards future events or develop characters in really small ways as they make their way towards their next big goalpost manga moment. While there are a number of things that were cut out this season that I honestly wish weren't, I have to say that I do appreciate the thought that went behind some of those bonus scenes. Having a tease to Hawks along with a tease of his and Tokoyami's mentor and student-like relationship was really fun. Seeing Irinaka actually taking the trigger and transforming during the raid was a nice little touch, and in general, these additions range from things that made me jump out of my seat slightly in rare surprise because I'm a nerd, to moments that made me just smirk and build hype. Now, as far as the episodes themselves go, there's quite a bit to discuss and poke at in the first half. Now, my understanding, and I'm sure you'll correct me if I'm wrong, because of course, is My Hero Academia only has a filler episode the first week every season by mandate of the channel that it's on, so it isn't actually Bones' choice to start every season with the usual boring recap episode. This year we got an actually rather enjoyable episode that could easily fit into the canon of the series, and it felt like a little bit of a love letter to the fans with its wholesome and sweet themes. Right after that, we're smacked with the true beginning of the season, with Chisaki taking on the League and making his name known to the audience in a big way. I think most would agree the big scene between the two villain groups was handled well, but this episode is where we start seeing a problem that's presented itself in the community all season long. And that's the issue of characters looking kinda weird and people absolutely hating it. The loss of Yoshihiko Omakoshi and others who were responsible for making the characters look a certain way by correcting frames and keeping a standard amongst the team is definitely felt harder in the first half, and while I don't think it gets anywhere near 7 Deadly Sins levels, at times it can be a little bit distracting. Realistically, I feel like the show still looks great, but I wouldn't be being honest if I didn't say my personal opinion was that it wasn't quite living up to My Hero Academia Season 2 as far as the consistency department.
Nothing was really bad for the first few episodes in the hideout, but the adaptation began feeling a bit awkward and inconsistent at times. The spooky underground dungeon was lit like a park under the midday sun, the walls looked like they have coffee stains all over them, and a lot of shots began looking like this. This is all very nitpicky and doesn't really do much damage, absolutely. The season was still relatively enjoyable here.
I feel like there's entire TED Talks and hour-long discussions that you can have on the motivations and the emotion behind a lot of the fights in My Hero Academia, thanks to the way that Horikoshi likes to write and set up his conflicts. To its credit, the anime does a good job of conveying these motivations and the raw emotion behind a scene, and the voice actors this year did an amazing job bringing the characters to life against Yuki Hayashi's amazing score. All of that build-up and setup continues to cook into the climax of the conflict, and in this series that usually involves someone getting hit really hard. For the climax to really hit like it should, the impact of those final blows should really be conveyed in a way that the audience can almost feel. You remember All Might knocking that Nomu out of the USJ Center. You remember Deku slamming Bakugo on his back. These moments stand out, yes, because of all the buildup around them, but also because just how much impact there was when things were finally brought to an end. Now, I mention that because in my opinion, at various parts of the season, like Kirishima's first use of Unbreakable, Sun Eater's final attack against Setsuno Hojo and Tabe, and even Murio's Phantom Menace, I feel like there was something seriously lacking in the oomph behind these moments. And this makes this half of the season really hard to judge for me, because to be honest, my feelings on the season are a lot more complicated than I thought they'd be. On one hand, I was really looking forward to the season of MHA and the content that it covered. The overhaul arc isn't the best arc in the entire series, but it's definitely one of the manga arcs that I was most looking forward to seeing animated, and I will admit that that's largely due to the fights and big moments this season. What we got was an overhaul arc that I feel like does a good job at everything that it set out to do, but not quite a great job. There's amazing things like Deku and Overhaul's fight or Kirishima and Fat Gum vs Rappa, and overall the source material is presented faithfully and at a good pace, and in a way that made the moments outside of combat feel worthwhile, even for the audience that's only here for those fights. But there were also times during the first half where I feel like characters didn't quite get the shine they deserved, like Mirio in his fight against Overhaul.
Now, What's important to understand is that when a TV animated production runs for 25 consecutive episodes, it is very likely that some episodes will suffer more than others, and it's often a game of trying to minimize the impact and move the production so that the episodes that are affected are ideally low priority ones. So with that in mind, how the hell did episode 11 happen? Stiff, awkward, and generally unimpressive, this episode turned one of the most impactful moments of the entire manga into an absolute mess. There are these weird After Effects transitions as well, which at times make it look like an AMV. It's just generally not a very professional look. And of course, the straight up slideshow at the end. This is actually likely not a lack of time or talent and rather conscious directorial choice. I can appreciate what they were trying to do here with snapshots of the encounter, but the way it was done is just so odd. It is way too static, and the removal of the narration from the manga makes it just such an awkward addition. We're just kind of watching Mirio stand still for a couple of minutes, and that just does not work very well in a medium where we expect movement. This scene could have been greatly improved by, for example, animating limited parts of the snapshots, like Mirio's cape or the debris, to make it a tad more dynamic, and of course to keep the narration from the manga to retain the actual emotional context of the scene.
Of course it makes sense for Deku's 100% moment to get the most love, but I feel like just a little tiny bit more consistency throughout the first half would have only heightened all of the hype and emotion associated with that final battle, and for a season that was supposed to feel like impact after impact after impact, it felt like a lot of those impacts were muffled. And at the very least, I do see how it's frustrating to some that the season may have been stifled just a bit because the production team was spread a little thin. So while I do certainly enjoy the first half of season 4 and I love the content that it covers, I'm left feeling like something small but noticeable has been chipped away from the thing that I love. It's not like anything major has been broken off of the series and no one walked up to My Hero with a hammer and broke it and ruined it, but just enough is different to leave me wanting more in a way that I feel is a little more negative than positive.
We have been doing a lot of bitching today, I know, so let's turn to something genuinely amazing. Episode 13, the climax of the overhaul arc. This is an absolute banger of an episode from start to finish, with meaningful changes from the manga. For example, taking this infamously confusing spread from the manga and turning it into one fluid, beautiful scene set to the series' new original insert song, Might You. Or how Deku's few punches were turned into a One Punch Man-esque meteor shower of fists, truly selling the absolute power of infinite 100%. This is an example where great direction, animation, and production come together to truly elevate the source material beyond the confines of ink on paper. And this isn't the only moment in the season. Kirishima's episode, Deku and All Might's conversation, Night Eye's passing, these were all handled with the utmost care and passion. But this is also exactly why my overall rating of the first half of season 4 would be inconsistent. The peaks of this cour reach all the way up to Hiroaka's greatest moments, but its lows dip so much further down than we have ever seen the series go. We got 100% and Kirishima, but we also got Mirio and the highway chase, which turned an incredibly stylish scene into another boring, lifeless, flat recreation with none of the spice and style of the manga version, and again, with lighting that looks about as bland as it can get. Why the hell can't more scenes be lit like this? So, as you can see, my thoughts on season 4's first half are pretty divided. I think that overall it was an enjoyable season with some incredible peaks, but the relatively frequent hiccups and just plain weird decisions made it a very inconsistent experience that at times really fucking annoyed me. And we haven't even mentioned Bones' newfound tendency of cutting important stuff from the manga, but don't worry, we will get to that soon. But for now, these are all of my thoughts.
So is this the overhaul arc I expected? Is this season's adaptation the one I wanted? The answer isn't as easy as yes or no. It's this weird mix of both for me that I'll say at the very least left me conflicted after my time with the arc in a way that the second half of the season didn't leave me conflicted, but I suppose I'm getting ahead of myself. Overall, I'd give the first half of the season an 8.5. I definitely don't feel like it was done well enough to get into the 9 range, and I could totally see the argument for the score being a bit lower, like an 8 or a 7.5. However, despite my issues with the first half, I did still really enjoy my experience watching, and I found myself smiling and yelling during the times that I was supposed to smile and yell at during this season, while also feeling that patented brand of My Hero Academia sadness that you can only get when you see All Might hurting.
Thank you so much, Pineapple, for having me on your channel. It was an absolute blast, and I do hope you all tune back in next time on my channel this time for our review of Culture Festival and the Pro Hero arcs. And believe me when I tell you this, it's gonna be spicy. But until then, Be safe, wash your hands, and I'll see you all next time. Thank you again. I'm Oceans, and I'm out.
Make sure you don't miss it. It's going to be awesome. I'll see you guys later. It's Pineapple. That's Ocean. Peace.